Hello, I'm Karen Long, President and founder of Streamline Government Contracts. Streamline helps small to mid-sized government contractors who seek experienced, effective support with contract management that will reduce your risks, increase your profits, and enhance your reputation. We do this by negotiating TAs, subcontracts, preparing estimates of completion when necessary, and speaking to contracting officers in their own language. We are the proud organizer of Government Contractor Chats and appreciate you joining us today. Now we'll turn it over to Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I am Lindsay Riegelsberger, the Office Manager and Marketing Specialist for Streamline Government Contracts. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker now. Rich Wilkinson is a Director in the Product Marketing Group at Unanet, a leading provider of project ERP software for professional services firms, which specializes in the GovCon space. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Rich.
Welcome, everyone. This morning's presentation will be a sneak peek review of Unanet's Gauge report for 2022. I'm Rich Wilkinson. I'm the Senior Industry Director for GovCon at Unanet. I'll be talking to you this morning about the Gauge report. Just a little bit of background on the report itself. We've been doing this since 2017. We do the report and the survey in conjunction with a CPA firm, Cohn-Resnick. We conduct an annual survey and study very closely the data we get from that survey. We then take that survey data and write a report that highlights the things that we thought were interesting in that data, and some things, even if they don't change, that for which we have year-over-year data, because it can show trends, even if those trends are not particularly dramatic. Sometimes the trends in the industry can reveal things about our industry and ourselves. Gauge is an acronym. This is GovCon. You knew it was going to be an acronym, right? Yeah, I think, in fact, it's required by law. The name of everything in GovCon has to be an acronym. And in our case, we had to stretch a little bit to get that initial G, but that's government contract compliance. And then A for accounting, U for utilization, G for growth, and E for efficiencies. Every year, we have a theme for our survey and for the report. We started in 2017 with budgeting strategies. And in 2018, we focused on the transition from small to large and from sub to prime. We hit internal controls in 2019, technology in 2020. Last year, we talked about creating a winning proposal. And that theme was all around the pursuit and capture process. This year, we selected reimagining how we work as the theme for this year's survey and study. And of course, the survey itself was done early this year, January through July. And we were beginning to come out of the pandemic. At least it felt that way at the time. And we thought that some of the effects of the pandemic would be worth talking about in this year's study. So that's what we did. The study itself has its most useful feature in benchmarking. In the GovCon world, we say if you want to win, you have to know your customer, you have to know your competition, you have to know yourself. The knowing yourself part sometimes is the hardest part of the three. Benchmarking helps because it can tell you what your competitors and your teammates are experiencing in terms of their trends, their rates, their key performance indicators or KPIs, and that's very useful when it comes to knowing yourself. It gives you a little bit of a crystal ball. It looks backwards for a great deal of the study, but it also gives you a little bit of a look forward when we interpret some of that data. This year, more than any year in the past, the respondents have been heavily from the C-suite. President, CEO, CFO, that comprised the vast majority of our respondents. Controllers and other C-suite positions contributed almost another 20%. And even those that were not in the C-suite were from management positions of responsibility throughout the organization. When we gather the information for the report in the survey instrument, we break the responses by revenue. And this year, for the first time, we added an additional revenue break at the upper end for companies over 250 million. But we go from 0 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 250 for the other bands. Notice the predominance of the 0 to 10 and 10 to 25. Our respondents for this year's study tended to be mostly small businesses. In fact, this year, for the first time, we also broke the responses by headcount. Now, in my opinion, and about $6 to get you a latte at Starbucks, but in my opinion, we blew this question. We asked about employee headcount. We should have asked for the headcount of the overall workforce, because what we got was employees, and the subs may or may not be counted in that, depending on how the individual respondents interpreted the question. Next year, we'll ask for total workforce headcount, and we'll explain that we want the subcontractor headcounts included in that number. Gives us a better feel and a better correlation with the revenue numbers. This year, 58% of our respondents were in the under 100 category, and another 28 from 100 to 350. We also asked people to tell us where they fit in the small business spectrum, if they're a small business, and any set-asides that they qualify for. In this case, almost 60% of our respondents were small businesses, but we also found a significant number of veteran-owned small businesses, either service-disabled or not, other minority-owned businesses, woman-owned businesses, and 8As. And of course, these numbers don't add to 100% because, as you know, small companies can be qualified in more than one of these categories. We asked people about how much of their revenues they derive from prime contracts versus subcontracts. This one was a little bit of a surprise for us. We frankly expected small companies to say that most of their revenues came from being a subcontractor, and we expected the large companies to say most of their revenues came from being a prime contractor. That wasn't the case. It's almost the same. It's slightly different, but not the way you might think. Look at the employee size columns over on the right-hand side. 61% of small companies said that most of their revenues came from being a prime, but only 65% of large companies said the same thing. And of course, the flip side, subcontracts 39% for the small companies, 35% for the large ones. There was not the dramatic difference we expected to see, which is really kind of interesting. It tells us that the large companies are being a subcontractor more than we thought they would, and probably more than they would like. And we wonder if the small business subcontracting plans that are in place, or mentor-protege programs, or subbing to a socioeconomic qualification in order to get in on a procurement, even if it's as a subcontractor, we wonder if those things might not have some influence over what's going on there. A few highlights out of the report. The pandemic was one of those earthquake events in GovCon. We say that GovCon moves at a velocity that's similar to crustal plates. Everything moves on a geological timescale. We don't expect things to happen quickly in GovCon, and our expectations are usually met. I mean, look at CMMC. We've been waiting for the CMMC clause to show up in the DFARS now for a year, and it's coming, but it's not here yet. And much of GovCon works that way. But there are a few changes that happened. In 2011, it was the shift from DCAA to DCMA in terms of the power structure. It was the dramatic changes in DCAA. And of course, in the last couple of years, it was the pandemic. And like crustal plates, pressures build up until all of a sudden there's a massive slip in the plates and an earthquake, and everything we've built falls down and we have to rebuild it. That's what happened back in 2011 with DCAA and the business systems rules. And that's what happened with the pandemic. Now, in this case, it was an external event that caused all of these things to change. But you can see from our little word cloud here, all the different things that have been impacted. I like the one virtual everything. We've gone to virtual presentations like this one. We've gone to virtual meetings, virtual audits, all kinds of things. And in fact, almost a virtual workforce for many companies. In the report, the full report, you'll see call outs at the end of every section that talk about the workplace horizon, not just what has happened, but what we see in the future for the GovCon workforce. We'll give you a little bit of guidance, though we're not really into heavy advice. There is a little guidance there for the things we can see coming. And a lot of things where in past years we didn't break it by head count, this year we do. We always ask government contractors about how they feel about the business environment. And it's really interesting. Government contractors are a very optimistic bunch. I mean, look at the numbers. 68% of our respondents said that they were either very optimistic or cautiously optimistic. That's a pretty optimistic bunch. And look at the 50 million plus companies at the far right of the center table. 86% said they were either very or cautiously optimistic about the business environment. That's a tremendous thing to say in the midst of inflation, the specter of a possible recession and a pandemic, and yet 86% said they're optimistic about the business environment. Some of that is simply the incredible reliability of the U.S. government and its funding of the things that we sell them. And in spite of that, when things happen, government contractors can be a little bit of a nervous bunch. They tend to spend or not spend, hire or not hire, based on what they see coming in appropriation bills and things like that. It's a little counterintuitive, but at least they're optimistic in general. One of the questions we asked this year that was all about the pandemic was, did you experiment with a remote or a hybrid work environment or policy? And if you did you take into account state taxes for where your people were located or not? Now, from my point of view, frankly, I don't care very much about the state tax business, but Cohn Resnick, a CPA firm, our partner in these surveys and studies, does. They're very interested in whether companies are taking into account where their employees are located for state tax purposes. So we asked the question in two pieces. For my purposes, I add those two numbers together. And what it tells me is that 69% of all of our respondents this year, small, large, and everything in between. In fact, if you break it by revenue, the numbers don't change very much. 69% of our respondents experimented with a hybrid or a remote work environment or policy during the pandemic. What we didn't ask is whether they plan to stick with it or not. You can expect that question to show up in the next year's survey, which we're putting together right now. We always ask this question as well. What keeps you up at night? And of course, it's pretty interesting what keeps the C-suite executives up at night. Now, it's a little bit of a trite question, but we've asked it this way every year, and we don't want to change the question very much or we'll get different answers. So we keep the question constant. What keeps you up at night? This year, for the first time, resource recruiting and retention bubbled to the very top of the list. That concern had not even been in the top 10 in prior years. That's really interesting. Of course, competition for contracts, the economy, operational efficiency, those are always in the top 3 or 4, but recruiting and retention, all the way at the top and all in one year for the first time. We thought that we might see changes in things like compensation plans. And we thought we had to ask a few questions around compensation plans if we're reimagining how we work. So we ask about base salary, bonuses, PTO, 401k, and medical insurance. We said, how does your compensation stack up to your competition and your partners? Do you think you're very competitive, just competitive, or on par with those? And the results, frankly, were kind of surprising. And I think you will feel this chart is even more surprising in light of some of the data I'll show you a little later on. 51% said their base salary was competitive or very competitive, and another almost 40% or more said they were on par with the competition. That's huge. 90% plus of our respondents said base salary, yeah, we're competitive or on par with our competition and our partners and all the other people we draw resources from. And of course, most of the responses were in that vein. PTO, 63% said they were competitive or very competitive, and another 40% on par, or 33% on par. It was a big segment of the respondents. 401k and medical, 55 and 59% respectively, either competitive or very competitive. And again, wait for it. At the very end, I'm going to show you some numbers that make you question, is this true? Can this be right? So we asked the hybrid work policy, hybrid work environment question a couple different times, different ways. And that's one of the tricks that they use in the survey world. If you ask the same question 3 different ways and you get consistent answers, you can pretty well rely on that data. On the other hand, if you ask the same question 3 different ways and you get 3 very different answers, you have to question the data. And you might not even be able to use it. In this case, we ask about hybrid work model, in office and remote workers. And we ask, how has this been affected during the pandemic? 65%, almost 2/3 said it had gotten better. Another 31% said, nah, it hasn't really changed any. Only 5% said it had gotten worse. Now, I wonder about these responses because frankly, a lot of companies didn't have a remote work policy before the pandemic. And so maybe the perception is anything was better. What bothered me a little bit was the very bottom thing. 49%, almost half of all respondents said they were struggling with recruiting and retention during the pandemic. The surprise here was the third bar down, time it takes to get work done. 27% said it had gotten better since the pandemic, and another 60% said no impact. So 87% said that remote work policies or hybrid work policies or arrangements had either no impact or improved the time it took to get things done. That's a huge realization for us. And you can expect some questions in the next survey around this and if that is still the perception or not. And that is what this question is all about. This is a perception question. How do you feel this has affected you? We ask about PTO, and this one was no surprise whatsoever. 79%, almost 8 out of 10 respondents said they accrue PTO based on a fixed amount per pay period based on the standard work hours in a year. That has been the standard in GovCon for probably 50 years, as long as I've been around, or almost as long as I've been around anyway. But there is a slow but steady trend toward unlimited PTO. In past years, this number has been almost so small it disappeared, and now it's up to about 12%. There is pushback against unlimited PTO in several quarters, some from employees, some from DCAA and other agencies. And that's probably limiting the speed of adoption with it, but it is a trend. Let's look at the compliance area. We ask people about audits. I mean, if you're in GovCon, audits are a fact of life. So again, these numbers are not going to add up to 100% because this is a check all that apply kind of question. And so what you can say about those numbers is 26% of our respondents said they had an incurred cost submission audit last year. 24% said they had either a pre-award survey or a post-award accounting system audit. What really surprised us was the very bottom. 52% of all respondents said, nope, didn't have a single audit of any kind last year, nothing. A little bit of a surprise. Part of that is due to DCAA's new risk-based audit policy, where they write a low-risk memo to the ACO and say, hey, looks good to us. Just take the rates the way they proposed it. And that's what has contributed to the very low numbers of incurred cost audits. I have a mistake on this slide, and I will fix this. I just saw it this morning. Purchasing system is on the wrong side of the bar. It's on the DCAA side, and it should be on the DCMA side. By the same token, material management accounting system is on the right side, should be on the left side. DCAA audits accounting systems, estimating systems, and material management accounting systems. DCMA reviews, they aren't audits because they aren't transaction-based systems. Purchasing, government property, and earned value. So what we asked people was, how often do you see these as a requirement in new solicitations? And for accounting systems, 34% said always, and another 32% said frequently. 66%, 2/3 of all respondents said, yeah, this one comes up in solicitations either all the time or quite often. All of the other systems, it was a very low number. Purchasing system, 20%, either always or frequently. That was a little bit of a surprise. Estimating, not very often, and the others not very often either. But the accounting system has really bubbled to the top in terms of a business system requirement. And a lot of agencies are saying you have to have an adequate business system to do business, accounting system to do business with us. You knew we couldn't do anything this year without asking about CMMC, right? Nobody has done anything in the survey world the last 3 years in GovCon without asking about CMMC. What surprised us a little bit was only 27% of companies said they anticipated having a CMMC requirement at level 2. And level 2 is expected to be the majority of government contractors. In fact, DoD continues to publish a number of 80,000 firms that will require a level 2 certification. And yet only 27% of our respondents said they anticipated being at level 2. Those two facts are a little bit at odds to me. What distressed us a little bit was 27% of, and remember, these are primarily from the C-suite. 27% of our respondents didn't know where they might fall in the CMMC spectrum. We've been beating CMMC around the GovCon court for about 3 years now. Everybody ought to know where they think they're going to fall, whether it's accurate or not. On the accounting side, there were some interesting things here. Everybody knows what days sales outstanding is, DSO. That's the measure of how long it takes to get your money back once you've spent it on things like salaries and expenses. So 5 years ago, 28% of our respondents said they got paid in 30 days or less. It was 30 days from spending the money to getting it back. This year in 2022, it's 41%. That is a significant increase, and it's not a data anomaly. Look at the numbers. It has increased steadily every year for the last 5 years. We're not sure exactly what's causing the favorable increase in the number of people that are getting paid more quickly. Part of it may be the government's efforts to pay small businesses more promptly. That could be part of it. Part of it could be closer attention to the Prompt Payment Act. I don't think so, but it could be. It could happen. Part of it could be the increasing prevalence of automated accounting systems or automated ERPs that tie everything together from timesheets to invoices that let you, number one, get an invoice out the door quicker. Number two, get it out the way the customer wants to see it, and therefore they'll pay it quicker. And number three, gets it out the door without errors in it. because errors in invoices are the #1 contributor to a poor DSO. Not how long it takes to get it out or how long the government takes to pay it, but is it right? Because one bounced invoice that spends 60 days in the rework and review cycle, that kills DSO more than any other single factor. Now, just in case you think to yourself, well, there's another 40% that are getting paid in 45 days or less, and another 16% that are making 60 or less. You know what? 60 days would be considered absolutely stellar performance in a lot of industries. Take a look. Management consulting in the commercial world has an average DSO of 125 days. 60 days doesn't look so bad now, does it? And 30 days looks absolutely fantastic. Even in architecture and engineering services or scientific research and development, they're over 70 days each. At 60, you're beating that considerably. And at 30, you're just beating it to death. These are good numbers. And in GovCon, we tend to think of ourselves as taking forever to get paid. We should probably not complain quite so much compared to commercial industries. We always ask about financial challenges, and this is one of those areas where we ask the same question another way just to see if things change much. And frankly, they did a little bit. Organic growth and the uncertainty of federal spending, even though the federal government has not spent less than they did the year before in any year since 1992. Nonetheless, those are the top two, and pretty reliably every year, those are the top two. But this year, benefit parity snuck into the graph. Now, we list 6 things on the graph here. So top 6 includes benefit parity this year for the first time. Not big percentages, but it was either the first or second choice for 20% of our respondents. And there may be a good reason for that. We always ask about M&A, especially at the smaller size range. Companies are concerned about, if I wanted to, could I buy somebody? Or maybe you have a principal looking for an exit strategy. This year, the numbers were pretty low. Almost 2/3 said, no, we're not looking at buying or selling this year. And that may be part of the business environment. It could be the pandemic. We're not sure. 12% said, yeah. On the small business side, 12% said, we're looking at maybe selling. 18% said maybe buying. And it's no surprise that in the larger firms, the numbers are very different. Almost 1/3 said they were interested in buying a company in the next year, but only 9% said they were interested in selling the company. Oh, we're up to the U engage for utilization. Here we ask about project management challenges, and look what bubbled up to the very top, resource management. Now remember, to a project manager, especially in the services industry, resources are people. So what we're really talking about there with resource management is recruiting and retention. And that was the #1 consideration, either as a first consideration or a second for project managers. The rest of those things are always in this question. They swap ranking sometimes, but forecasting and experience in the project management staff is always in the top 3 or 4. We ask nearly the same question for the HR folks, but here we did something that we're going to do for every question next year. We separated recruiting and retention because they're different, and look at the difference in the responses. Let's see, it looks like almost 2/3 said that recruiting was either their first or second concern, whereas retention, it was only about 40% that identified retention as their first or second concern. To me, those things should be pretty much neck and neck, but then I'm not an HR professional. I'm an accountant by trade. So I wonder what's going on there, and we'll ask some more questions about this next year, just see if we can figure out what's going on there. Notice that compensation and benefits came in 3rd, almost the same as retention. We always ask people about, what do you think's happening with your workforce? Are you growing? Are you shrinking? What do you expect to happen in the next year? And what's interesting here is that shrink significantly, shrink slightly, and grow slightly all have been the same for the last 4 years. They just haven't changed by any significant amount. In fact, the small changes that you do see there are probably what we call data jitter. It's just variation responses caused by a slightly different population in each of the survey responses last 4 years. But grow significantly and remain the same have now converged. Grow significantly has declined every year for the past 4 years, and remain the same has increased every year for the last 4 years. So things are changing, and it's a steady change, if not dramatic. Now, this chart, I'm not going to plow through this one in any detail. I will encourage you to download the full report, and I'm going to give you a link at the end of the presentation to download the full report, where you can study this chart at your leisure. If you pick a column based on your company size, maybe you're in the 10 to 25 million band, you can look across here and see what the average is for workforce by function. Business development, 2.5 people roughly. Accounting, about the same. IT, maybe 1.5 or a little better. Project controls, recruiting, compliance, legal, half a person. Internal audit, a third of a person. Internal audit, another third. So these are very useful for benchmarking your back office functions against other companies you know, maybe partners, maybe competitors, or maybe someone you're hiring from if you're taking people. We ask about square footage usage in the growth area of this year's survey and report. And here's what's interesting to me, at least. 46%, 30% said their square footage had declined during the pandemic. Another 16% said they repurposed space. What that says to us, 46% had reduced their usage of square footage for housing people. They either got rid of the square footage or they repurposed it for other purposes to perform their work and not house employees. And that fits pretty well with what we heard and saw about the remote work policies, things like that. We always ask this question, and it hasn't changed much. And this question is not interesting because it's changing. This question is interesting because it's not changing. In GovCon, in Contracting Officer School, and I went to that school years ago, they taught us that government contracting is a level playing field. Everybody has the same opportunity. Everybody sees the same notices. In those days, it was the Commerce Business Daily. Today, it's FedBizOpps or SAM.gov or GovWin or GovTribe or Federal Compass or Bloomberg or one of the other market intel organizations. But the number one method or mechanism for finding new opportunities is relationships. And they taught us in Contracting Officer School that that's not how it works, but it is. In the real world, relationships are everything. Who you know and what they can tell you about what's coming is everything in the BD world. Notice how distant the third and fourth and fifth choices were. Virtual events and conferences, public notices, Google searches. And I will note that the events and conferences has dropped dramatically, probably as a result of the pandemic. A lot of organizations aren't doing them, and the ones that are doing them virtually. And frankly, they're just not as effective in a virtual environment. It's one of the few things I can say definitively, just aren't as effective in a virtual environment as they were in person. We ask about win rates, and we do this every year, and it's improving pretty dramatically. 3 years ago, 25% of companies were winning 3/4 of the time. That's not very much. Today, It's 38%, almost 4 in 10 are winning 75% of their pursuits. But look at the bottom two segments of the bar, 62%. Of our respondents said, we win less than half the time. For us, it's a coin toss, which is kind of interesting to me, given what government contractors spend on a proposal. Pursuit and capture is not an inexpensive process for us. And so winning half the time is not a great thing. I'll just leave that there. There's more in the full report about that. I'm sort of getting along toward the end, and this is a complicated set of numbers here to talk about. And so I'll ask you to download the full report and study this and some of the other graphs that go along with this particular topic that time didn't allow me to put in this presentation. But I want to focus on the first line, fringe. Notice the number there for the average, 26%. That's considered a pretty low fringe rate. Remember that fringe is made of basically three elements. There's payroll taxes, and payroll taxes are between 10 and 11.5%, depending on your state. There's paid absence, vacation, holidays, sick, bereavement, jury duty, military duty, whatever you give people pay for when they're not in the office. Those things add up to another 9 or 10 points in most compensation plans. Add those two together, you're between 20 and 22% right off the bat, which tells me that with an average fringe rate of 26%, companies are spending 4% or less on health insurance, life insurance, long-term disability, short-term disability, 401k contributions, and all the other things that employees look at and say, well, yeah, that's a benefit to me. They look at paid time off as an entitlement. Everybody has it, everybody gets it, you accrue it. They look at payroll taxes, trust me, they don't look at it as a benefit, but it does go in our fringe pool. But those things that they do look at as a benefit are down to 4% on the average. Now look at the biannual revenue columns. 0 to 10 million, 20%, average fringe rate. That means they're providing payroll taxes and paid time off and not much else. No health insurance, no life insurance, no 401k contribution. I think we may have put our finger on part of the recruiting and retention problem. There is a tendency to look at a number like that and say, well, that can't be right. It's a data problem. It's an anomaly. It's data jitter. It's bad responses. Folks, we didn't ask this question for the first time this year. We've been asking this question every year. Look at the fringe rate. That's that dark line at the top of the graph. 4 years ago, it was well over 30%. In fact, I think that number is 34%. Today's 26%, and it's been a steady year-over-year decrease for 4 years. That's not data jitter. It's not an anomaly. It's not bad data. It's not a bad set of responses from too few people. It's a change in the industry, and we don't know where it's coming from. We'll ask more questions around it next year. Notice that all the other rates, overhead rates at least, are also decreasing. Some of that, especially from 2020 to 2021, is a direct result of the pandemic. It's because people shed excess square footage. It's because they did other things to reduce the cost of maintaining facilities. And some of that even happened in the customer site arena, where they provided less and had to provide, didn't have to provide as much for people that were sent home to work at home out of a home office. G&A, SCMH, pretty much constant every year. not a lot of change. And that probably what change you do see probably is data jitter, though the material and subcontract handling rate has got a more of a change from 21 to 22 we can't explain. There is a lot more in the full report, and there's a link here, info.unanet.com, gauge-report-2022. That's a lot to type. If you will point your mobile device at that QR code, your camera, at that QR code that you see on the screen next to that link, it will take you right straight to the page where you can download the full report. We also maintain a benchmarking site, and this benchmarking site lets you put in your size or your NAICS code or your head count, and it will then show you statistics from our survey and let you benchmark yourself against probable competition or teaming partners or big primes that you want to team with. You don't have to put in your size or your NAICS code. You can put in the size or NAICS code of a company you want to know about, and it will give you the data just of that company. That data is currently the 2021 data, which is useful. We will be updating it over the next week, and about a week from now, that benchmarking site will have the 2022 data in it for you to benchmark against. You can still point your mobile device at this QR code, and it will take you to the benchmarking site. You can then bookmark that, go back to it next week when the 2022 data is there. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. This is one of the things we do here at Unanet that really has nothing to do with our primary purpose, which is to sell software. In my line of products is to sell software to government contractors. This we call thought leadership. It is something we do as a service to the industry. Obviously, it is also marketing materials for us. We would like for you to think kindly about us and our knowledge of the industry, but it's free without cost to anyone who wants to download the report or benchmark themselves against another company. Thank you very much.